Just wore right out.
There's some major damage done to the pulley on the drive motor on this thing, so it's just worn out and it just crumbled, fell to pieces. It's the pulley that the drive belt sits on, which runs the whole thing, so it's gone.
Rick Ness and Parker Schnabel went head-to-head on the same Yukon ground, each gunning for the season's top payout. Weeks of non-stop digging built to one brutal showdown. And when the clean-outs hit the scales, the numbers stunned everyone. Rick walked away with a staggering $170 million jackpot, leaving Parker flat-footed, his season's gamble crushed in an instant. Don't miss a single twist in the gold rush. Like and subscribe now for more. The night sky over the Yukon was fractured by the roar of engines and the metallic scream of excavators grinding against frozen earth. Spotlights cut through the darkness, catching the steam of breath from men who hadn't slept in days. On one side of the valley, Parker Schnabel's crew fought to keep the pay dirt moving, the machines devouring ground at an almost reckless pace. On the other, Rick Ness and his hardened team stood like shadows against the floodlights, working in silence, every scoop of gravel carrying the weight of a billion-dollar gamble. Neither side knew it yet, but the next few hours would ignite one of the most violent treasure rivalries modern gold mining had ever seen, an escalation that would end with a find so vast it could rewrite mining history itself. At first, it looked like just another stubborn cut of earth, a place Parker had written off months earlier after geologists dismissed it as barren. But as Rick's crew drilled deeper, the resistance beneath their augers shifted. Instead of clay or gravel, their machines struck dense mineral veins, the sound reverberating like iron on steel. Sensors spiked, readings going off the charts, and the soil began releasing faint metallic shards that shimmered even under the mud. Rick leaned in, running a calloused finger through the dirt, and for a fleeting second, even he struggled to believe what he was seeing. This wasn't dust or flake. It was raw, crystalline gold, bound together in a way that suggested not just a vein, but a motherlode. Word traveled fast. Parker, who had built his empire on precision and discipline, stormed across the claim line, suspicion flashing in his eyes. For years, he'd watched Rick rise from underdog to rival, always underestimating him, always convinced his own operation would outlast any challenger. But now, under the glare of the Yukon lights, Parker's composure cracked. His geologists scrambled to recalibrate data, cross-referencing scans from months before that had flagged anomalies but were buried under layers of inconclusive results. The reanalysis revealed what no one had wanted to admit. The ground beneath Rick's operation sat atop a geological fault zone capable of trapping immense quantities of gold. It wasn't supposed to be possible, yet the numbers didn't lie. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. Instead of the usual scatter of nuggets and flake, massive chunks of ore began surfacing, fused with quartz and rare earth elements. Each piece told a story of violent geological pressure, a record of gold being forced upward through the crust in explosive pulses of molten rock. But there was something else. Embedded in the quartz were traces of palladium, platinum, and even iridium. Metals so rare, they're more often found in meteorites than in earthly veins. Whispers spread among the crews that they weren't just pulling treasure from the ground. They might be unearthing remnants of a cataclysm, millions of years old, preserved in a fault line like a time capsule of Earth's most violent history. Then came the discovery that shattered the fragile truce between crews. Rick's excavator bucket dragged up not just ore, but the remains of a collapsed wooden structure, timbers preserved in the permafrost as if frozen in time. Carvings along the beams bore marks no one expected, primitive etchings resembling early survey lines, almost like a map burned into the wood. Rick's men fell silent, realizing they weren't the first to dig here. Parker watched in disbelief, fury and dread clashing across his face. If these markings were real, it meant miners or explorers had been here centuries earlier, chasing the same fortune they were now ripping from the ground. And if they had failed, the question hung in the cold air like smoke. Why? Excavation slowed, but the sense of urgency only grew sharper. Every beam pulled from the pit carried deeper markings, numbers, coordinates, and finally, a date scorched into the grain. 1897. That year wasn't random. It was the height of the Klondike Gold Rush, when thousands of prospectors swarmed the north in search of wealth beyond imagination. Historians had long believed dozens of expeditions vanished without trace in the uncharted wilderness. Now, the evidence lay in their hands, and it pointed to one brutal conclusion. Someone had reached this exact deposit more than a century ago, struck gold, and vanished without a word. Machines thundered through the night, mud flying, tensions boiling over into shouted orders and silent glares across claim lines. Then, as the beams gave way to deeper soil, the true scope revealed itself. Beneath the collapsed structure was a cavernous void, an ancient underground channel carved by glaciers and sealed for millennia. The first scans lit up with readings that defied comprehension. Pockets of gold so concentrated they could dwarf anything the Klondike had ever produced. The crews stood stunned, breath hanging in the freezing air, realizing the fight between Parker and Rick was no longer about rivalry or pride. They had stumbled onto a jackpot so vast it could command not just fortunes, but empires. As the shock gave way to action, floodlights pierced the newly exposed cavern, their beams swallowed by shadows that stretched endlessly into the earth. Rick's crew anchored cables, lowering scanners into the abyss, and the data they returned deepened the mystery. Dense pockets of gold lit up the imaging like veins of fire, but they weren't random. They coiled and folded in ways no geologist could explain. The software strained to render the patterns, spiraling back on themselves like a labyrinth, less like natural ore and more like vaults of deliberate design. As machinery pushed further, Parker's team intercepted fragments pulled from the void, strange metallic alloys welded into the gold itself, alloys that modern labs couldn't replicate without advanced smelting. Analysis suggested they had been subjected to temperatures far exceeding what could occur naturally in the crust. Forensic metallurgists, flown in under the radar, began whispering about lost techniques of refining, methods that may have predated industrialization. If the readings were true, then whoever first reached this cavern might have known secrets about metallurgy that science had since forgotten. The rivalry on the surface turned from anger into obsession. Every ounce of dirt became a battlefield. Then came the collapse. A section of the cavern roof gave way under the weight of heavy machinery, revealing a hidden chamber sealed tight by rock and ice. Inside, preserved in crystalline frost, lay artifacts impossible to mistake: leather harness straps, corroded pickaxes, rusted tin cans, and the skeletal remains of men who had ventured here long before. Their bones were twisted in strange positions, as though death had come not by accident, but by panic. On one skull, a crude copper pendant still clung to the jaw, etched with the unmistakable symbol of a compass rose. This was no random band of wanderers. This was a prospector team from the Klondike era, and they had died guarding something they never escaped with. The discovery split the valley like a fault line. Rick pushed deeper, convinced fortune lay just beyond the chamber, while Parker's anger hardened into ruthless calculation. He unleashed a fleet of pumps to drain the cavern faster, knowing time was slipping away. With every gallon siphoned, the cavern floor revealed more than gold. It revealed entire shelves of crystalline growth, mineral formations laced with flecks of rare metal. Geologists marveled at the discovery, not for its beauty, but for its implications. The concentration of iridium and osmium suggested the cavern might sit atop the impact path of an ancient meteor strike. If true, the gold itself could have been forced upward in a single cataclysm that rewrote the geology of the Yukon. As crews drilled into these shelves, they uncovered something no one expected: a narrow stone wall, perfectly smooth, too symmetrical to be natural. Embedded into its surface were rivets of hammered gold, arranged in lines like the braces of a vault. When the excavators tore through, the wall gave way, not to rock, but to air, a hollow, sealed space, untouched since the 19th century, or perhaps far earlier. The first lights that pierced inside revealed stacked crates, wrapped in rotted canvas, their edges crusted with frozen mud. The smell of decayed timber mixed with something metallic, almost electrical, filling the cavern like a storm about to break. Rick's men pried open the first crate, and the sight detonated through the crews like thunder. Inside lay raw ingots, thick bricks of refined gold, stamped with markings no one could identify. They weren't government seals, nor company marks from the Klondike era. The inscriptions were archaic, almost Templar in appearance, with crosses and concentric circles branded into the metal. Some ingots weighed over 50 pounds each, heavier than any Parker had seen in a lifetime of mining. In seconds, the stakes shifted from profit to legend. This wasn't just Yukon gold. This was something transported, hidden, and entombed with intention. But the crates were only the beginning. Behind them, deeper in the chamber, lay stacked scroll tubes sealed in copper casings, their surfaces blackened with age. When one was forced open, a rush of dry air escaped, carrying parchment still intact. Symbols lined the pages, maps, diagrams, even what looked like coded instructions for navigating across rivers and valleys long erased by glaciers. Parker's crew, though furious at being cut out, couldn't deny the implications. These weren't just artifacts of a failed mining party. They looked like records from an expedition far older, a journey that had carried knowledge into the Yukon and buried it beneath the permafrost. Chaos erupted above ground. Crews clashed over who controlled the chamber. Claim markers were torn out and replanted in the mud, and armed security began circling both operations. But below the surface, the discoveries kept pouring out. Massive veins that glittered like rivers of fire, crates of gold so heavy they needed cranes to lift, relics from vanished miners, and maps suggesting even greater hoards further north. The valley had transformed into something more than a gold field. It had become an open wound in history itself, bleeding wealth and secrets faster than anyone could contain. And as the last crate was hauled into the floodlights, its markings sharper, cleaner, more deliberate than the rest, one truth crystallized among the chaos. The jackpot wasn't just real, it was engineered to be found. When the crowbar bit into its timbers, the lid split with a sharp crack, and what lay inside pushed the mystery to an entirely new level. The seal resembled a cipher wheel, concentric rings of symbols that shifted with every flicker of light. as though the design itself contained a code. The gold wasn't stacked in bars, but molded into arcs that locked together into a perfect disk, a golden map, radiating lines outward from a single central point. Silence fell. This wasn't treasure for trade or currency. It was a message. The disk's surface shimmered with engravings of coastlines and rivers, but not in the shape of any modern map. Glacial patterns stretched across lands now long eroded, rivers carved in directions no cartographer could recognize. Geological experts on site argued over the impossible. These were land formations frozen in time from thousands of years before the last ice age. Parker seized one fragment, his gloved hands trembling, and traced a line that curved north into regions still unexplored by mining. If the disk was accurate, it pointed toward uncharted gold fields hidden beneath ice sheets, untouched by any rush or claim. The realization cut deeper than rivalry. This wasn't a jackpot, it was a key. As the disk was pieced together under the lamps, an even stranger detail emerged. Embedded within its arcs were faint inlays of silver and iridium, aligned in patterns that resembled constellations. Astronomers later confirmed the designs matched star maps from 12,000 years ago, suggesting the artifact wasn't just a map of Earth, but a fusion of heaven and ground. The question twisted in every mind watching. Who had the knowledge to etch such precision, and why had it been buried with crates of gold? The cavern no longer felt like a discovery. It felt staged, as if generations had conspired to hide and then reveal it. Deeper in the chamber, beneath layers of ice welded to the bedrock, Rick's excavator teeth struck something solid. At first it seemed like another vein, but when the bucket rose, it carried stone unlike any other in the Yukon. Polished slabs, jet black and rectangular, locked together as though they'd once formed a structure. Symbols ran along their edges, spirals and angular shapes eerily similar to the carvings on Templar relics unearthed in Europe. Forensic archaeologists called in under the cover of night confirmed the stone wasn't local. Its composition matched volcanic rock found only thousands of miles away. Someone had transported it deliberately, constructing a vault in the wilderness to house gold and knowledge beyond its era. The revelation tore open old legends, whispers of vanished expeditions, stories of European contact centuries before Columbus, tales of Norse ships vanishing into the ice-choked Atlantic, all fused into a single possibility. If the slabs were genuine, then forces far older than the Klondike miners had seeded the Yukon with their secrets, layering gold not just as wealth, but as a lure, a trailhead for those determined enough to risk everything. Parker raged at the thought of Rick controlling it, while Rick pressed harder, driving machines into the ice, each discovery stoking the fire of rivalry into open war. The next strike of the drill changed everything. A piercing screech echoed through the cavern as steel tore into hollow metal. When the excavator withdrew, it carried fragments of a sealed container, iron reinforced with bands of bronze. Inside, preserved in vacuum-sealed dryness, lay documents that seemed impossible to exist in the Yukon permafrost. Pages of vellum inscribed in Latin, their ink barely faded, describing in coded prose the relocation of a hoard unfit for kings. Dates aligned with the early 1500s, the very era of Templar dispersal across Europe. Margins bore sketches of ships, their sails emblazoned with symbols identical to those carved into the black slabs below. The Yukon Cavern was no accident of geology. It was a vault, deliberately chosen as the final resting place of cargo once hunted across oceans. Shock spread through the crews as they processed the scale. They weren't just standing in a mine, they were standing in a burial ground of civilizations, a crossroads where ancient maps, lost explorers, and cosmic alignments collided. The $170 million jackpot wasn't a single deposit, but a layered inheritance, staged and sealed to outlast empires. And as the last of the crates were hauled upward, dripping with ice, Parker and Rick locked eyes across the floodlit chasm. The rivalry that began as two miners chasing gold had become something far darker, an unspoken war over history itself. The weight of that revelation seemed to shake more than the men. The cavern floor rumbled, seismic monitors flashing as tremors rippled outward from the excavation zone. Crates still embedded below gleamed in the mud, half exposed, like bait daring them to dig further. Guards gripped rifles tighter, eyes darting between the gold and the rival crews, while overhead, dust sifted from the ceiling with each groan of the earth. The treasure wasn't just a prize anymore, it was a fuse, and both Parker and Rick were standing at the match head. Rick's crew lashed cables, hauling another container through the icy sludge. But when it broke the surface, it wasn't filled with gold. A sealed chest, bronze-bound and heavier than stone, cracked open under the hydraulic clamp. Inside lay a lattice of gears and discs, corroded but still recognizable, machinery crafted with precision that rivaled modern engineering. The pieces locked together into a device that resembled an astrolabe, but its dials were engraved not with stars alone, but with cycles of eclipses, comets, and alignments stretching millennia. Scientists rushed forward, voices sharp with disbelief. The mechanism could chart celestial events with accuracy thousands of years into the past and future. Whoever built it had predicted cycles. Modern astronomy had only recently confirmed. The weight of the revelation sent fissures through the rivalry. For Parker, the jackpot had morphed into a nightmare. What good was gold when the world would demand this machine, this proof, this disruption of history? For Rick, the find burned with temptation and dread, the promise of wealth, eclipsed by the knowledge he might be holding an artifact capable of rewriting civilization's timeline. As they argued, machinery struck again, this time unearthing bones unlike those from the Klondike. Larger, broader, fused with bronze fittings, the skeleton bore armor plates etched with runes not yet deciphered. At its side rested a sword still intact, its hilt studded with gemstones dulled by centuries. The discovery silenced even the most hardened miners, leaving the cavern thick with a dread no floodlight could cut through. Above ground, the storm broke. Helicopters thundered into the valley, blades slicing the night, their spotlights drowning the campfires below. Unmarked convoys poured in along the ridgelines, men in black uniforms fanning out with precision, cordoning the valley in silence. Orders barked through radios, mixed with the shouts of crews refusing to surrender their claim. Reporters who had been circling for days finally broke through, their cameras catching the chaos, machines grinding, crates hoisted, rifles raised in warning. Within hours, the Yukon dig site was no longer a mine, but a battleground where history, science, and greed collided under the roar of military engines. Yet even as authorities seized the crates, one artifact remained hidden in the shadows below. Buried beneath fallen slabs, overlooked in the scramble, Rick's spotlight froze on a final chamber door. Stone sealed, its surface unbroken, carved with a single design that none could mistake. The same cipher wheel that marked the golden disc, the same concentric code glimmering like fire across its face. Unlike the crates, unlike the bones, Unlike the gear-driven machine, this door was untouched. Whatever lay beyond had been sealed deliberately, not abandoned. Rick reached out, tracing the symbols with shaking hands, as if the stone itself were breathing beneath his fingers. The roar of engines above muffled the silence, but down in the dark, every man felt the shift, the realization that the gold was not the end, but the lure, that the crates, the maps, the relics were only fragments scattered like breadcrumbs leading to something hidden deeper still. The $170 million jackpot was real, but it was only the surface of a vault designed not to be mined, but to be awakened. And as Rick's palm pressed against the cold stone, the cavern trembled once more. Not from collapse, but from something stirring on the other side.